Hey everyone, welcome back. So you know how we love to take those deep dives into history.
Absolutely.
Well, today we're taking a trip back to 19th century London.
Oh, fascinating time period.
It is, but hold on to your hats because it's not all fancy tea parties and top hats. We're diving into the rather unpleasant world of cholera outbreaks.
Right, a bit of a dark side to the Victorian era.
Yeah, this one's specifically for you, Jamie Rush. You sent in that request to learn more about those cholera outbreaks, and honestly, it's a story that needs to be told.
Right, it's a story that's kind of a forgotten part of history.
It is. It is. So picture this. London, 1800s, bustling, growing, but also struggling with, well, some serious sanitation issues.
Yeah, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing, so lots of people, lots of factories, but the city's infrastructure struggling to keep up.
Exactly. And this created, well, the perfect breeding ground for, you guessed it, cholera.
A very serious bacterial disease.
Right. And this is before people really understood how diseases spread.
Yeah, which made it all the more terrifying.
It did. So before we get into the nitty-gritty of the outbreaks themselves, let's just take a step back. What exactly is cholera? I mean, I know it's bad, but help us understand just how bad.
Okay, so cholera is a bacterial infection. And the thing about this bacteria, it lives in contaminated water, and when ingested, it releases these toxins that attack your intestines.
And that's what causes.
Severe diarrhea, dehydration, it can kill within hours.
It was a death sentence for a lot of people back then.
It was, especially in the conditions they were facing.
Right. It's hard to imagine the fear, right? Knowing that something invisible in the water could just take you out like that.
Absolutely, and the speed with which it spread just added to the panic.
Yeah. And, speaking of water, we got to talk about the Thames. I mean, it's the heart of London, but in those days, it was also a major source of the problem.
Oh, the Thames was more than just a river back then. It was the city's lifeline and its sewer system all rolled into one.
That's a rough combination.
It really was. Imagine the city's waste, everything was just dumped directly into the river. And people were using that same water to drink, to cook, to wash.
That's kind of blowing my mind right now.
I know, it's shocking to think about now, but that was the reality. And of course, this created a perfect breeding ground for cholera.
It's like adding fuel to the fire.
Exactly. And the saddest part, they didn't even know it.
Right. They didn't understand how cholera spread, and that's where the miasma theory comes in.
Yes, the miasma theory. It's the idea that bad air, or night air as they called it, caused disease. It was a popular theory that had been around for centuries.
I mean, I guess it made sense to them at the time. Bad smells were often associated with outbreaks.
Right, the logic was there, but it was tragically misguided.
Yeah, tragically. So instead of focusing on the real culprit, the contaminated water, they're busy trying to fight off this bad air.
Exactly, they were trying to fix the wrong problem,
Which, well, understandably led to some pretty ineffective responses.
to say the least. Think about it, burning incense to purify the air or avoiding going out at night. It did nothing to stop a waterborne disease.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg.
It really is.
Okay, so let's recap. We have a city bursting at the seams with inadequate sanitation. Then you've got this deadly disease lurking in the water. And on top of all that, a fundamental misunderstanding of how it spreads.
A recipe for disaster, really, and that's exactly what happened.
Right. These cholera outbreaks were devastating, thousands died, and the fear, it must have been palpable.
It was. Imagine the terror of knowing that one sip of water could mean a painful, swift death.
And what's really heartbreaking is that this lack of understanding, it led to some pretty awful scapegoating.
Absolutely. The poor were often blamed for the outbreaks, their living conditions seen as the cause rather than a consequence of the wider problem. It's a pattern we see again and again in public health crises.
It's a tragic cycle. The most vulnerable are often the ones who suffer the most.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that public health is deeply intertwined with social justice.
It is. But amidst all this despair, there was a glimmer of hope, a beacon of reason. And that beacon's name was John Snow.
Ah, John Snow, a true pioneer, a physician who dared to challenge the prevailing wisdom.
He was skeptical of the miasma theory, and thank goodness for that.
Right, he refused to accept the status quo. He was determined to find the real source of the cholera outbreaks.
And so during the 1854 Soho outbreak, he did something truly revolutionary. He started mapping the cases.
Meticulously, he went door to door, tracking every case, plotting them on a map of the area.
And this map, It became his weapon against the disease, right? It allowed him to see what others couldn't.
Exactly. He was able to connect the dots. And what he found is that the majority of cases were clustered around a single water pump on Broad Street. It was a groundbreaking use of data visualization, the birth of epidemiology as we know it.
He basically cracked the code.
He did, and he used that knowledge to take action.
So what happened? He goes to the authorities, map in hand, and
He presented his findings, and with some persuasion, convinced them to remove the handle of the Broad Street pump.
no more contaminated water.
Exactly, and almost immediately, the number of cholera cases plummeted. It was a dramatic demonstration of the link between the water and the disease.
It's a mic drop moment. Proof positive.
It should have been, but as with many scientific breakthroughs, it wasn't that simple. The medical establishment was slow to accept Snow's findings.
Really? Even with the evidence right there.
It's a reminder that changing deeply held beliefs can be incredibly difficult, even when presented with irrefutable data.
I mean, it's good that he persisted, though, right?
Absolutely. Can you imagine where we'd be if we were still blaming bad air for cholera?
Scary thought.
It is. But ultimately, Snow's work was a turning point. His meticulous research, his insistence on following the evidence, it laid the foundation for a new understanding of disease transmission.
And this understanding eventually led to
Public health measures that we take for granted today. Clean water, proper sewage systems, all these things that have drastically reduced the incidence of cholera and other waterborne diseases.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as clean water can have such a profound impact.
It really is. But it's a reminder that these things don't just happen. They are the result of tireless work by people like John Snow, people who are willing to challenge the status quo and fight for a healthier future.
So, Jamie and everyone listening, we've seen how those cholera outbreaks ravaged London, the power of scientific inquiry, and the importance of understanding disease transmission.
It's a story that has lessons for us today.
It does, because even though we've come a long way, challenges remain. Access to clean water and sanitation is still a major global issue.
And we still see inequalities in healthcare access, making some communities more vulnerable than others.
Right. It's a reminder that the fight for public health is far from over. So as we move forward, it's worth asking ourselves, what can we learn from those who came before us?
How can we apply those lessons to the challenges we face today?
Food for thought. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time for another journey into the past.